Hello everyone, today Rishit and I excited to present our project exploring the Big Mac Index and the world economy indicators. It's a comparative analysis of Big Mac burger price inflation, and economic indicators for various countries, along with insightful visualization. We utilize two data sets, the Big Mac Index dataset, which tracks burger price as a measure of purchasing power parity, and a global country information dataset, which provide indicators like GDP, tax rate, and population. By merging these two datasets, we explored how Big Mac prices correlated with economic factors. We're aiming to gain insights into global purchasing power, inflation, and economic disparity using data visualizations. Our work includes interactive plots along with insightful correlations metrics, which is unique. Now let's dive into the research questions that guided our analysis. We will focus on the following questions. Those questions provided a comprehensive framework for examining the interplay between economic indicators and purchasing power. The methodology, we utilize Python libraries such as Plotly, Stable, and Tier to create a variety of visualizations. This includes color class maps to highlight geographic trends, scatter plots for correlation analysis, and heat maps to visualize inflation patterns. Those approaches not only ensure statistical accuracy, but also deliver user-friendly visuals that are easy to interpret and explore. Let's now move to the visualization and insight derived from those questions. The line chart of Big Mac price by country helps to identify how Big Mac prices in different countries have evolved, reflecting local economic conditions, inflation rates, and currency valuations. From the chart, we can observe the years with the most expensive and cheapest Big Mac price, as well as the trends in Big Mac price across different countries. We also utilize a heat map and the Big Mac price from different countries to examine the evolution trends over time. The Big Mac distribution box plot allows for a quick comparison of price variability across countries. Countries with small boxes have more stable prices, while larger boxes indicated high price fluctuations over time. The countries where Big Macs are the most expensive are Switzerland, Norway, and Sweden. We utilize plotting requests to create an interactive color maps that visualize Big Mac price across different countries and illustrates global disparities. This map provides a representation of the Big Mac index, allowing us to quickly identify geographical patterns, such as regions with higher or lower purchasing power parity. We created a scatter plot to show correlation between GDP and the Big Mac price to view additional data like country and year. It is useful for dynamically exploring trends across time and countries. We also use a candidate symbol chart, trying to emphasize the overall trends and the statistical relationship via regression. The clustering patterns showing the common characteristic of countries. We also visualize the PDP trends over time. We also provide insight into the relative purchasing power of currency compared to the US dollar. Users can easily compare trends across multiple countries, identify outlier or consistent performers. We generate a color path map for geographic PPP distribution. This map enables comparison of economic conditions globally, highlighting regions with significant disparities in purchasing power. We also generated interactive line plot for inflation to compare several different countries.
So I'll continue with the rest of the visualizations what we have made. Here, this shows a final chart of various which is basically an interactive bar plot for the average inflation rates. As we can see from the figure here, Argentina has the highest average inflation rate when comparing it from the year 2011 to the year 2020. You can also see like the countries like Egypt, Pakistan, and India rank third, fourth, and fifth in the ranking. The figure shown here is an interactive heat map, which basically uncovers the trends in the utilizing various economic factors. The purpose of this dynamic exploration of inflation trend was for specific countries and years. By presenting data in a compact yet informative format, the heat map enhances the understanding of global price dynamics and economic disparities. With the help of heat maps, it's ideal to identify hotspots and cross-country comparisons of inflation trends. In this particular matrix, we can see that the y-axis basically tells us the timeline, and the x-axis shows the performance of various countries. The following figure is known as a tree map, which basically shows the distribution of Big Mac prices versus the GDP. The size of each square, what we can see here is basically the size, the GDP of the country, and the color coding in this particular figure is the dollar price of the Big Mac in that particular country. It can be seen that countries like Switzerland, United States, Norway, and Sweden have a high GDP and have a higher Big Mac prices compared to certain Asian countries like South Korea, Japan, and India. Uh, the tax rate versus the purchasing power parity was also compared. The purchasing power parity was obtained using the merged data set, which basically combined using which was basically done by combining the two data sets we had. The first one being the World Economic data set, and the other one being the information data set. As we can see from the first figure, the total tax rate and the purchasing power parity relationship has been shown, where Switzerland being at the very top and Argentina being at the very fag end. In the second figure, a bubble chart has been shown to demonstrate the same purchasing power parity against the total tax rate in that particular country. In this particular figure, the size of the bubble basically shows the size of the GDP of that particular country. The two big circles what we see here are the are countries denoting India and China. In this particular visualization, we wanted to compare the tax rate and the purchasing power parity in form of a bar graph. For better visualization purpose, the purchasing power was scaled for better visualization. It can be seen that Australia, Canada, Sweden, Switzerland, Singapore, and Saudi Arabia were the countries with justifiable tax rate when compared to the triple P. In the figure, we can see that all of the countries where the ratio of the orange bar and the gray bar is almost half of the other one are the ones where the tax rate and the triple P are justifiable. As we can see for the countries like Canada, where the tax rate is very much less when compared to the triple P of that country. A similar example can be like countries like India and Indonesia, where the tax rate is actually higher than the triple P of that particular country. Moving on, we also did visualizations just to demonstrate the wage distribution using chloropleth maps. And we could see that countries like Australia have a very high minimum wage rate compared to certain African and Asian countries. It can also be seen that overall North America as a continent had higher wage rates. In this particular visualization, we compare the Big Mac prices and the minimum wage by country by country comparison. Uh, as mentioned before, countries like India, Indonesia, Peru, Pakistan, Malaysia, and Mexico are not ideal countries to purchase a Big Mac, as the minimum wage rate in these countries are quite low. These results align with the insights gained when we did a comparison between the tax rate and the triple P. Indirectly, triple P in these countries are also very less. Similar to the chloropleth map shown before, this is a visualization of the minimum wage versus the Big Mac price in form of a radar chart and a circular pie chart. From the color coding and the distribution in this particular circular chart, we can see that countries like Australia and New Zealand have high Big Mac prices and also have a very high bare minimum wage rate compared to countries like India, where the minimum wage rate is pretty low. Uh, to compare the triple P of various countries, gasoline price is also an important factor which needs to be considered. In this figure, we basically compare the gasoline prices versus the Big Mac price for a particular country. From the overall trend, it can be seen that the gasoline prices and the Big Mac prices are directly proportional to each other, which states that both the prices are a good indicator for triple P of a country. One exception for these indicators can be Saudi Arabia, where we can see that in Saudi Arabia, the Big Mac price is significantly high when compared to the gasoline price in that particular country. Specifically, it can be seen that countries like South Africa had around 33% and 66% of the ratio. Our dataset also include another important factor, which was known as out-of-pocket health expenditure. In this summary statistics, we have shown the out-of-pocket health expenditure for the top 5 countries and also for the physicians per thousand, which is the number of physicians available per thousand people in that particular country. The top 10 countries with highest out-of-pocket health expenditure were Armenia, Yemen, Afghanistan, Iraq, and so on. Out-of-pocket health expenditure is directly proportional to the physicians per thousand, as mentioned before. Using the chloropleth map, we demonstrated how CO2 emissions is also an important indicator. By the color coding seen here, it is quite evident that countries like China and India have higher CO2 emissions, which signify that these countries have a higher industry development level and are known to be manufacturing hubs of the world. We finally come to the bubble charts where we are comparing the minimum wage versus the gasoline price relationship by country. In this particular visualization, we are able to compare 3 variables together, which is the gasoline price on the y-axis, the minimum wage on the x-axis, and the CPI change, which is the color coding as it can be seen. There is also a fourth dimension which can be seen in this particular visualization, which is the size of the bubble chart. Here, the size of the bubble chart basically shows the GDP of a country. The CPI basically stands for a consumer price index, and it is a similar metric as the purchasing power parity. Uh, the, s- the two big circles we see here are India and China. And this particular circle, what we see here is the United States. Similar to the previous visualizations, we also had visualizations involving unemployment rate, birth rate, and GDP. From the plots, it can be seen that most of the countries had birth rate between 5 and 25. US had higher unemployment rate when compared to India and China, which was quite surprising. And even in these plots, the size of the bubble shows the GDP of the country. For better visualization purpose, the x-axis was converted into a log scale. Uh, Moving on, in this particular slide, we are showing a visualization using bubble charts and 3D scatter plots. Moving on more onto tree maps. Uh, Fertility tree map was a very good option when we wanted to visualize how the fertility rate changes from country to country and how overall every continent has a different rate of fertility rate. Even the out of health expenditure could be easily visualized using a tree map. From our project, the overall key insights we could find was like the countries like India and China had huge GDPs and still had low purchasing power parity. Out of all the countries, India had the most dynamic inflation rate when compared to the other countries. Also, China and India have had high CO2 emissions, showing that these countries are the manufacturing hubs. And because these are the manufacturing hubs, this is also the very much reason why they have a high GDP despite the low purchasing power parity. North America, as a continent which included countries like majorly United States and Canada, had a balanced tax ratio versus the triple P. Compared to the European countries, USA, despite being a developed country, had a high income disparity between rich and poor. This could be seen can be seen using viewing the education level of that particular country. Africa and Asia had the most out-of-pocket health expenditure, and USA, despite having a good health infrastructure, had high out-of-pocket health expenditure. Countries like Singapore, despite having low population, had a high GDP and triple P. For most of the countries, like GDP was proportional to the population. And lastly, certain Asian countries like India and Indonesia had high gasoline prices despite having low minimum wage rate and triple P. Overall, gasoline expenditure in the US was higher, signifying that in the US, the dependency of personal transportation is higher compared to the personal transportations in countries like Indonesia, suggesting that in Asian countries, people prefer to use public transport a bit more than personal transport. We also had certain challenges and limitations when making this project. For example, for some countries with high population, Big Mac price might not be a correct indicator to judge a country's performance. Inflation can involve a lot of factors like gasoline prices, interest rates, and etc. In this project, the inflation rate was measured using the Big Mac prices alone, which is one of the many factors involved when estimating the inflation. The health infrastructure was quantified using the number of physicians per thousand. For a country, the health industry depends upon various factors like the hospital accommodation, the health insurance available, etc. And that's why just by quantifying the number of physicians per thousand is not the correct way to justify a country's health infrastructure. Lastly, we would like the sources what we referred was the economists, which were the ones who came up with the Big Mac index to compare countries at various levels. The World Bank had the World Development Indicators, the World Economic Outlook database, and related studies and visualizations. Thank you.